We're staying in Shelter Island. Yeah, we're able to stay there. Usually when we come to San Diego, that's where we stay.
I already missed it.
Heading back tomorrow?
Tomorrow afternoon.
Let's not be in front of the exit.
Okay, right here is
There
fine.
we go, that's good, works.
That's the big men in the center.
Just gotta go to the wide angle.
I'm sorry, guys.
One more.
Will I remember?
Perfect. Thank you very much. I will share this with the congregation.
Great.
And let everyone know.
Nice to meet you, how you doing?
Nice to meet you as well.
Wish you guys-
I wish I could stay for
Yeah, we do
morning
too.
worship.
We wish you
It's not for today, discussing yearly updates. You guys are in.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Anyway,
We're busy. We've narrowed it down to 2 days a week because there's so many entities distributing supplies and stuff, so we're on Mondays and Saturdays. And on those 2 days, we are busy. So we've got wheelbarrows, we've got shovels, rakes, sifters. All kinds of stuff.
you look great, though, and you're dressed well.
Hey, I appreciate you, and I'll be in contact with you. God bless you. All right, you guys take care of yourself.
Fantastic. I wish you might have thought of it. I used to think of things like that. Just make sure they put their names on the case or something. Yeah. The communal. Whatever you think is best. Okay, perfect. What we'll do is okay. I just need, she was really awesome because, you know, they did such a good job on Wednesday. You know, it was our first issue. I can actually help those boys. If that's. Yeah, no, she didn't vote it up.
Yeah, I asked Mark.
You had everyone mention class, right? The thing is that I would teach you not formal. I'm going to show you to the formality. Sometimes I don't teach you. So what I did is I kind of figured out on my own, and then I started teaching. And, you know, I really thought I knew how to teach until I used to do it. Also, you know, yeah. So We're the instruments. It doesn't really matter which shot sound, but it matters that you do it. And it's like, relax.
We'll come back.
You can always sit here.
Lean the opposite way. That way you can sleep like that. See it.
Start with the next. Yeah, no, I wish I had. Had it.
What I did is I just took the music sheet. Anybody that picked the words that know. They try to make this not there. Yeah, you're blowing your starting note. These guys, they'll take the starting note. That's so you're not starting higher tuition. That's
There's
I actually, on vacation, I started. So you already know.
It's just my body.
2 weeks ago was a war.
Mr. Davis Stain.
I'll come forward. He was going to.
Hey, good to see you in that big lunch truck. Well, not a truck.
Yeah, it was.
Which truck? Your Bronco?
Oh, that's a, yeah, I guess you could call it, well.
Oh, I call that a truck for sure. It's a sweep. Call it whatever you want. It's sweep.
We call it a homemade car.
Yeah, it's
All right, I think I heard the buzzer. I think we're ready to start here. We're gonna have to, whatever's going on with this is not going. So I'm gonna make a nod to Bob, and he'll have to advance the slides here for us this morning. We've got several slides to show here too, so we'll see how that works out. But we're all together here now, got through this beautiful rain, ready to begin Lord's Day to worship God and to begin by opening up His Word, reading from it. Let's bow and have a word of prayer. Our holy and gracious, sacred Father, your name is above all name. You're the only true and living God and creator of heaven and earth. We give you our praise, our gratitude, our humble worship, and gratitude for the goodness that you have created. We see its power, we see its strength, we see its majesty, but we also see the love that you have extended to all who would name you as their creator. Our Father, we pray that you will forgive us when we fail you and we do not do those things that we should, and we do those things that we know are not right. Our Father, we pray that you will be patient and merciful with us here individually and collectively as we continue to serve you, worship you. Thank you for this beautiful morning and now this opportunity to open your word, to understand from history those things that happened so long ago that affected your people. We pray you will give us a clear mind and a good heart. Pray that you will bless our families, keep them from the evil that is in the world. Through your Son, the Christ, we pray. Amen. All right, as we have been announcing for some time, we start a new quarter this morning, and we're going to take a month or so and look at the house of Herod. Most people haven't studied this in the past, but it has a very direct relevance historically to the people in the New Testament. Probably the most famous thing that we know about Herod is what was called the slaughter of the innocents, when he killed all the Hebrew babies of Bethlehem from 2 years and younger. And we'll look at that here in a minute. But we want to get a kind of a scope, an overall idea of who this man is that has such an impact upon our Lord and his disciples. If you'll hit the next slide there. Herod came from very, we might say, ignominious beginnings. Antipas was named by Caesar to be the commander over Judea. And he was an Idumean. And Idumean means that he was an Edomite. And you may recognize that they would trace their lineage to Esau. And so this was their claim to fame. The period between the Testaments, sometimes called the Maccabean period, when Judas Maccabee began the revolt against the Roman army, and that's when they rose up, and for 400 years there was battles back and forth trying to control Judea, but they couldn't fight against Rome. Antipas would have a son, Antipater I, and he would take his place. Antipater would teach his son Herod how to balance, I think, the Jews and the Romans. And Herod was the master politician. We'll see that here in just a moment. And the reason why he was able to come and stay in his position was that he was very intuitive about the political landscape. We've all read books or seen movies or things of that nature about various empires, whether it be the British or the Ottoman, or in certain areas of Africa, their various empires, that the kings are always paranoid. They're always worried about someone coming to take over. And at the same time, they're always looking to enlarge their kingdom. They want to enlarge their power and authority. Well, you hit the second slide, Bob. No, that's the third one. Come back. There, the next one. That's a touchy button, I guess. Yeah, there we go. There's the second one. Antipater married Cypros. Cypros was a princess of the Nabateans. And this really riled the Jews. The Nabateans were people that most today aren't really familiar with them, but they were a tribe. That's really an understatement. They were a nation of people to the far east, out at the edges of the deserts. And the most famous landmark of the Nabateans was their capital city, Petra. Go ahead and hit that one. This is where Cypros came from. We all recognize that picture. We've seen it. Dewey and I were very fortunate to go there. When we got over tourists, said, if they're not going to Petra, I don't want to go over there. This was number one on my list. It is so extraordinary. And I know in our day and time, when now many of us have, after we've raised our families, and those who are raising families and now maybe later one day will be able to get out and get a little more freedom, you want to go there. There aren't words to describe this. This is just one of hundreds of buildings that were carved into the red rock. And to see the economy that they built was extraordinary. They were vicious people. They They would attack trade routes, and they would steal, and they would grow their food, and they would trade in gold and silver. They became a very rich nation. This woman that Cypros, that he married, next slide here, she was the Nabatean princess. So Antipater and Cypros had 4 children. They had a daughter, Salome, and then 3 sons, Joseph, Basileus, and Herod. Herod was born in 74 BC, and he would die 4 years after Christ had come. And this is his beginning. Now, when Herod would come, and I'll show you in a moment how he came to power, just like Antipater and Antipas, the Jews never fully accepted them. But they were in no position to find an alternative. They were just like, well, here's your leader, whether you like it or not. Well, he's not a Jew. Well, yeah, but he's got connections to it. And the next slide here, Herod will marry Miriam. Now, over on the right side of that slide, you see the name John Hyrcanus. He was Jewish royalty. He was one of the final survivors of the Maccabean revolt. Heavily involved in that period of time that gained unlimited freedom for the Jewish people. So he was royalty, and he was a hero for them. He had a daughter, Alexandra, and then she had a daughter, Miriam. Miriam was the granddaughter of John Hyrcanus. And so Herod married her. Herod will have 10 wives. 2 of them are named Miriam. This is Mary the first. We'll see here a little bit later. But when Herod married Miriam, that was his effort to try to shore up his royal legacy and legitimacy to be the king of the Jews, which he later would become. But this is his beginning, and this is where it came from. It came from the family of John Hyrcanus and his grandfather, Antipas, who was put there by Caesar. He'll learn from his father and grandfather, you want to be on good terms with Rome, and we'll see the extent that he'll go there. All right, the next slide, Bob. In 47 BC, Antipater, he is supporting Julius Caesar. Now, we're coming back a few years to see what all happened. The first slides, I was just showing the marriage line. Now we're going to see a little bit more of the history behind that. In 47 BC, Antipater was supporting Julius Caesar, and he was such an ardent supporter that he named him procurator of Judea. There's the governorship. This is how they got their foothold into the, quote, Holy Land. And when Antipater became procurator of Judea, he had those 3 sons that we showed earlier, and he'll name Herod as the ruler or tetrarch of Galilee. Now, he's somewhere between 25 to 30 years old. Some have said as young as 16. I'm not sure that adds up or not, but we're going to say roughly 25 years old. He becomes the ruler, tetrarch of Galilee. All right, next slide, Bob. 3 years later, Caesar is murdered by Cassius, famous, Brutus Cassius et Brute. He is murdered by Cassius, and Caesar's son and nephew are Octavian and Mark Antony, and they mount up and go fight Cassius. Cassius is out here in the regions of Syria and Judea. Cassius is now realizing he's got a big fight on his hands, and so he demands a pretty stiff tribute from all the people from Judea to supplement and to sponsor, pay for his war with Octavian and Mark Antony. And so Antipater, who is the procurator there, he is pushing. Herod's with them too. And they are pushing to get all of the money they can, and they had pretty heavy hands. And the Jews hated that, but they were under pressure from Cassius to raise this money. In the process of raising that money, Antipater was murdered. That left a vacancy there, so you hit the next one. And this is where Herod will marry Miriam, the granddaughter of John Hyrcanus. He's looking at the landscape here, and he says, here's my chance. I might be able to move myself forward here with this. So this is what happens that following year. All right, Bob, next one. The next year, Cassius is defeated. The man that they backed, he's defeated by Octavian and Mark Antony. And this is one of the things that really begins to set Herod apart. It is in the dead of winter. No one would ever sail. We just recently studied about Paul trying to sail to Rome. Herod commissions a ship in the dead of winter and sails straight to Rome. News of his daring voyage that no one would ever take precedes himself, and by the time he gets to Rome, Octavian, Augustus, the Caesar, he is really impressed. Who would do this, to come all the way to come talk to us? And he came and he convinced Mark Antony. He had already been friends with Mark Antony before, but he convinced Mark Antony to let him keep his position as Tetrarch of Galilee. And the Caesars and the house, they are so impressed with this guy. You know, who is this Idumean half-breed who the Jews don't like, but he has control over them? They're impressed with his audacity and with his resolute ideas. And so they let him stay there. So he will return, and now he returns with a renewed strength and authority. All right, Bob? And 11 years later, a civil war breaks out between Octavian and Mark Antony. And this is what you might have read about this, the Battle of Actium, where Mark Antony is defeated, and his girlfriend, Cleopatra, you know, they realize we're on the wrong end of that. Mark Antony commits suicide, and Cleopatra will then do the same. She supposedly, now this is just extra biblical, this is just history, tradition. Supposedly Cleopatra had made advances towards Herod, hoping that now he, having the power there, would give her the power over Jericho. Jericho, it's hard for us to think about it. Jericho was the real jewel in the entire region of the Holy Land. Jericho was the Riviera. Jericho's on the Jordan River. It's just beautiful, lush, a great place to be. This is where Herod will die. He'll have a summer palace there in Jericho. But Herod rebuffs her and says, nothing doing, whatever it goes. She dies. Now, Mark Antony is dead. He has backed Mark Antony against Octavian. Once again, he's on the losing side. What does he do? He commissions a ship and he goes right back to Rome, this time in front of Octavian, who would later be known as Caesar Augustus. And he says, look, and this is where historians say this may have been his finest hour politically. He said, look, I know I was against you in the Civil War. I was on the losing side, but I was loyal to Mark Antony. And if you'll let me remain, I'll be just as loyal to you as I was to Mark Antony. And that so impressed Caesar Octavian that he allowed him to go back and then take complete control of Judea. And this is where Herod now will, though Caesar didn't give him this title, he would be the procurator. Herod comes back from Jerusalem and said, I am now king of the Jews. And that did not sit well with Jews, as you can imagine. But he has the full force and authority of Rome behind him. So this is what sets the stage for Herod's place in the ancient world and now in the New Testament. No one is going to argue with Herod. No one will go against him because he has so much power. All right, up. Now, Herod was a vassal king. And what that means is he cannot go out and start wars. He didn't have the authority to do that. So as he looked at the situation, to keep control, he decided that he was going to keep his control through construction. And he had all kinds of projects that he began once he took full control. The four major ones, and we're going to take time this morning to look at them because three of them are going to have direct relevance to the New Testament, are Masada, Temple, Herodium, and Caesarea. We could put a fifth one up there and saying that his palace in Jerusalem. He built a personal palace that had scores of apartments within it. Now, there's nothing left. It's just gone. We just have to rely upon the remarks of Josephus and Strabo. But evidently, it was quite a palatial complex, simply to receive dignitaries from around the world. He built that to impress. You've all heard about the White House was built to impress the leaders of the world, that they could bring them here. It always makes news about that. That's what the palace was. But that's gone. Here's the ones that we're going to look at here. The first one is Masada. This is Masada. And it is a place that is about 60 miles or so southeast of Jerusalem. And it's on a plateau, as you can see there. This was not built as a palace. This was built as a refuge in time of war, that he could get away with his life. Click the next one, Bob. This may be a little better picture of, no, back up. There, in the middle there. It's touchy, isn't it? There we go. It's a little dark there, but this gets a little better picture here. And I do have my pointer that's working here. Yeah. I'm going to come over here and use this one to show you how this is laid out. Is that, you see, this is the Dead Sea out here. And there was a way to get in there. I'll show you in a moment. But this right here is the kitchen. That's all food. All of those are granaries. The granaries that was just full of food. Behind them would be where all of the staff would have lived. The houses and where they worked, etc. And moving up here is his residence right there. He had a great view to the north. I'll show you in a moment. And then terraced down, here was another garden, and then down here was a little temple that he had built. But this would tower over the desert. And from this vantage point, you could see anyone coming for a long while. And he faced it to the north. There were no enemies to the south. No one would come up from this way. But this is a completely isolated mountain by itself. It would be impossible to get up to unless you knew the way to get up there. Inside this was extraordinary. We were fortunate to go there and spend some time to look in and see how similar this was to Pompeii. I'll show you that here in these next. I was gonna do the slide, right, Rob? Next slide. When I stood up on the top of that, at the edge there where his residence was, and I looked out north, having spent most of my time in the desert on dirt bikes, I looked out there and all I could think of was, this looks like Plaster City, Agatia Wells. This looks like where we would be riding up there north on the west side of the Salton Sea. And that's just what it looked like. And it went all the way up to Qumran. This is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, up there. But this is just all open desert. That's all it is. And then it moves up to the mountains and then goes down to the Salton Sea. And if you can come back a couple of slides, Bob, I'm sorry. Backwards, one more. Okay, the next one. The forward one. Yeah, no, one more. Forward, please, yes. Right there. You'll see that on the other side of the Dead Sea, these mountains begin, and they're pretty steep mountains. And it reminded me, I'm just going to give you the reference, of the Kofa Mountains on the other side of Yuma. So how it looked, the water comes down, there's the Colorado River, the basin, etc. Just like at the Salton Sea, you start coming out of there, you go up into mountains, desert mountains. It's almost identical topography to that. And so on the other side here are these mountains, and on the other side, way out there, is where Petra is. The Nabateans would be way out there in the desert. And they were fairly isolated, so when you got into their territory, that's how they could steal and do their little business here. Okay, one more. That was the view from the north that I just had to take because it just reminded me so much of that. All right, the next one, Bob. Here's a little aerial view. You can see here's his palace right here. Here's his palace where he lived. This is his spa. This is his hot springs right there. They'll bring hot water into that. And this is all the granaries right there. So they got the food there, got his house, his spa. He's got a hot one and over here a fresh one. And then all of the staff are back here, right, like that. Okay, the next one. This is how they heated the water. This is rather extraordinary that as it was explained to us, they build fires right there. That thing is, in that little enclave right here, is a roaring fire. And close it off, and the heat went right through those holes. Next slide, please. And, next slide. And they came out of those holes into this room. And the room had an elevated floor. This was flooded with water. And these pylons, they would have scores and scores of those. They would be roughly about 20 inches high, something like that. And they would put that hot water through it, and it would come up through, the heat would come up through the floor. And that was their sauna, that was their spa, and they would keep that thing going. There's a little bit you can see of the wall that there, those were hollow tubes, hollow clay tubes that were elongated, and they carried the whole wall. So the heat, the heat and steam from the water would go up those little tubes and would heat the room. So they have, heat rises, and so they filled that room with steam. This was their steam room. Okay, Robert. This is backing away a little better look at it, where you can walk in and look at it. Here are all the little pylons. The entire floor would be covered with this, and the fire is back there that's heating everything. So this gives you an idea of the size of the room, that they had to have their baths there. All right, Robert. And this is another section of it showing in the corner where the water would have been. Okay, Robert? Now, this is the Plateau Masada. How would they get up there? There was a passageway that not everyone knew where it was. It was secret, and they could hide it. And say, well, what is this right here? This is a ramp that the Romans built. Now, ironically, Herod never was able to use this as a refuge. He would die in the year 480 in Jericho, die of a bad, terrible disease. They think it was an advanced kidney disease that racked him with skin cancers and worms, and he died a very horrible, horrible death, and then had his body transported to Jerusalem. We'll see here in a moment. But in AD 70, remember the Romans came in, they leveled the temple, they started going through Judea. There were 900 Jews. When they saw the Romans coming, they got out of Jerusalem and they went right here. So there were 900 rebellious Jews up here on top of this. The Romans were not going to let them go. So what they did was they began to build this earthen ramp, and they just filled it up and filled it up. And it's not in the picture, but down at the base of it here, there's the remnants of the Roman camp. It took them quite a while to do that, but they eventually were able to build up, break through the wall right there and go in and then slaughter everybody. Now, the dark ramp is original from 73 AD. This white strip on top, that was put there in 1981 when they made a movie about Masada. There's a TV miniseries that was made in 1981 with these English actors that reenacted the story of Masada. And so they had to, that earthen ramp had worn down a little bit, so they built it back up for the movie. And so that's what that is. And the Roman camp that they used in 73 AD for the soldiers to go up, they used that for the movie studio, for all of their gear and their cast and their crew and et cetera and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we have here at Masada. There's the Dead Sea. There's the Chocolate Mountains. That's what they're called here. There's the mountains on the other side that goes out to the desert. And there's nothing after that. I mean, there's just, you go for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, maybe a few thousand. There's nothing there. We drove through it and I said, this is just like a cosmic parking lot. There's barely a shred of anything. You couldn't bring any sheep out there. There's no vegetation. It was like a surface of the moon as you go out there. Okay, Robert? All right, this is the final picture we have from the air of that whole, this whole fortress right here. And there's the ramp that went up to it. And the great irony of that Herod never used it. Okay, any question or comment about any of that before we go on? I don't want to just race through this stuff. Daniel?
That ramp looks a lot steeper from this viewpoint.
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah. When you get out there and see it, that angle lens, I think, from whoever took that shot, from straight down, it looks a little sharper. When you come down a little closer, it's still really steep. It's like a 45 degree. 45 degree is really sharp, but you're right. That looks more like an 80 degree or 75 degree. But it was enough that they could bring their engines up, and they had those engines, and then they would heave the big rocks. Matter of fact, it's somewhere like right around there. There is a pile of these round boulders that are about this big around that the Romans had shot up there to destroy, try to break the fence, and so they just collected them all there. And that's residue from the attack by the Romans in 73 AD. So all of that is still there. It's just an interesting place that is a monument to man's futility to save himself. He just can't do it. Okay, all right, Robert. This is how you get there today. They have two ways. You get a tram at the visitor centers on the backside. We took the tram up, and then we took this way back down. It's just switchback. It's a long way, because it's pretty high. But in the spring, it's not too bad. I would hate to have to walk that in the dead of summer. That would be a killer here. Danny?
Do you know what the elevation was?
That's a good question. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, you can go home and Google it and bring it back Wednesday and tell us. No, we're not Googling during class. We're going to have to take all the cell phones like the schools did somewhere. Okay, all right. Now, the next one is the temple. That Herod saw that this is where he could ingratiate himself to the Jewish people. Because the temple was still destroyed from the Babylonians. Now, the reality is, you go to 3 or 4 different references and you'll get 3 or 4 different pictures of what the temple looked like. We can't tell or describe exactly, but there's a general layout and floor plan of what the temple was. And this is the model that was built in 1967 of how the temple would have looked. This is the model that we used earlier in Acts when we showed the Praetorium, the soldiers' gate over there in the corner. But this is basically how it would look. The outer court would be for all the people that could come, Jew and Gentile alike. And then in the inner court, There's the people that would come to offer sacrifice, then the priest would go through the first set of doors, and then here is the inner court, and then of course, inside the holy, and then the Holy of Holies inside that temple. I'm sure most of you know this, that the configuration of the temple, as Solomon built the first one, was based upon the synagogues, the tabernacles. The tabernacles, because they were laid out with the tents, the outer court, and then the inner tent, and then the inner tent, and the things that were involved with that. It's interesting to think about this, that I don't know if you've ever been in a class where someone has suggested this, but when you begin to study the interior of the temple, and there are all of these cherubims. There are cherubims that are sewn into the fabric of the walls, sewn into the fabric of the veil, and then the two large cherubim that were in the Holy of Holies, whose wings touched from wall to wall, and then the two small cherubim that were on the ark itself. Someone asked, well, wait a minute. Didn't God say, thou have no graven images before me? Aren't those graven images? The answer to that, I believe, is that, number one, they are not images of any kind of earthly beast or creature that God created. Secondly, they are those heavenly beings that are directly connected with God. We have not done that here, but maybe, who knows, Lord willing, one day we'll be able to have a study of the angels. When you get to the cherubim, the seraphim and then the cherubim, they are uniquely created. They're not regular angels. They are uniquely created for the sole service and purpose of God. Not for mankind. They'll have other angels for that. And so the idea is that when the high priest walked in, they were in the presence of God, where God lived, where he said he would abide, and this is where his cherubim would abide. The cherubim never left God. They were always with the presence of God. So that may help answer if you've ever had a question about what are all these, because when you see artist rendering based upon the scriptures, you see these winged animals, all everywhere. And then if you're the high priest, you walk in and there's these two huge ones right in front of you. You say, wait a minute, is this like the golden calf? No. The calf is a creature, beast of burden, that men worship. The seraphim and the cherubim were God's creatures. Yes?
I think that's part of the point also, is that the common man couldn't see that.
Yeah.
That only the high priest could see that. So they couldn't bow down and worship it. They couldn't offer incense to it. There was nothing they could do with it.
Great, that's a good point. Yeah, there's no way they could come in. No one would even think of worshiping a cherubim. Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else? Okay, he built that not because he was such a sincere Jew, desiring to restore the worship. There's argument that maybe he was in part at times. I don't see that myself, but clearly the purpose was to ingratiate himself to the Jews. They needed a place to worship God, and they were at a loss, and Herod provides it, and that's what they have. Danny?
Related, but maybe a quick sidetrack.
Sure.
So when it was Israel traveling after they left Egypt, God basically commissioned, right, how to create the temple and all this stuff.
The tabernacle.
Exactly.
Yeah, the tabernacle.
And then after that was gone, that period, Solomon, right?
Yeah.
All that, but I don't even know if that was officially commissioned. I can't remember, but I think of this, I'm like, when did they get to just start building a temple? And is it just, when does God say, well, sure, I'll live there, you built it up, here I come?
No, it's Solomon. When the people asked for a king and they got a king, Saul was not going to build this, and they knew that. The promise had been that God would build his house, and that would come from the seed of David. David, this is 2 Samuel 7. This is where David thought, I will build the house. He was very zealous to build a house, and God said, you will not build the house. And you remember why? Because his hands had shed innocent blood. He said, because your hands have shed blood, I cannot let you build my house. He said, but your son will. Solomon lived in a 40-year reign of peace. There was never a war. Solomon did not shed blood. And so it was to Solomon that we go back and read that God gave the specifics of how to build a temple. It would be similar in fashion to the tabernacle, having an outer court, inner court, a temple of a holy place, and then a most holy place, just like they did in the portable tabernacle. But they wanted something permanent. And so, yeah, God did specifically give that to Solomon. The problem here is that now, when that temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, now, later on, Herod has just basically, what do you think it looked like, guys? He had, I'm sure, had a bunch of counselors that would be consultants that say, well, we believe it's this and we believe it's with that. And so, however that worked, it was built. And I'm just going to throw out here something, it has nothing to do with our class here, but it is something to think about. That when Solomon built the original temple, one of the materials were the cedars of Lebanon that were so many and plentiful. You go to Lebanon today, they're not a single tree, they're gone. They wiped them out. And all of the preservations today for environmental to protect our lands, which is, I think that's a great idea. We would have lost Yosemite and Yellowstone and all that. The timber industry can come in. That it can come in and completely wipe out. That in the ancient age, they did that. Now here's my point. It's not a political point of wood or not wood. The point is, the world back there, really? The world at that time, back in that region, didn't look anything like it does today. It was full of vegetation, trees, and all kinds of creation that it was full that man just basically systematically just wiped out and took away. So that's why much of it is barren today, but it wasn't that way originally. That's why, how could you look at that and say, really? This is a land that flows with milk and honey? It just it looks like desert here. Well, it did look like that way originally. And there's still portions of it that are quite lush and beautiful that the people didn't touch. But the temple demanded quite a bit. Yes?
But see, now you got to my point where I wanted to go is, this wasn't commissioned by God, right? This is just a temple that Herod decided.
Oh, this one right here? Yes. Yes.
That's what my confusion, like, God said build this, he said build that, and like, all of a sudden, like, this can't be.
Oh,
It sounds like you're talking
Yeah,
temple.
yeah,
I thought you were talking about the temple too.
Well, this temple, this is a
Yeah.
temple, right?
yeah. Well, this is Herod's temple.
That's
This
right.
is what it's usually called.
Well, you said
Yeah.
it is set up with a priest, the high priest sacrifices, wasn't that all too?
Well,
was that to a
that's
different
all
God?
back with Solomon. The original temple, the first temple was Solomon. God gave him strict instructions on how to build it.
So is this for God? I think
No.
it's.
This is Herod's temple.
Okay,
So Solomon's temple was destroyed. It was gone.
right, but I thought what you were saying, and this is where I was confused,
Yeah.
because I never heard of this, I'm like, who built another temple to God?
No, it was already gone. It was gone. And Herod decided, I'll please the Jews. We will try to rebuild the temple. But no one really knew what it looked like.
Yeah, but this was still supposed to be a place of worshiping God.
It was.
sacrifice.
It
Okay.
was.
So it is what I was thinking. Okay, that's where now you see how it gets all
Yeah, in the
twisted up.
first century, this is where people would go to worship. That's right.
And then they have an ephod there, because wouldn't it be kind of like that's?
Right. Right. They would have everything there, the table of showbread, and all of the stuff that the original temple would have had. It likely didn't look just exactly like that. So Herod's temple, this is what we need to call it to show the difference. Yeah, John?
Probably not as opulent as Solomon's either.
Right.
It probably wasn't laced with gold and silver and
Well, there were three temples, Solomon's, and then what's sometimes called Hezekiah's, and then Herod's. And when Hezekiah, through Zerubbabel and Haggai, when they rebuilt the temple, you remember what the Old Testament scriptures say, that when they finish it, what did the old men do?
They wept
They cried. And why did they cry, Donna?
because it wasn't beautiful like
It
Solomon.
wasn't near as beautiful as Solomon's. That's right. So the glory had been gone.
But the gold was still, Herod's temple was still filled with gold, because when the Romans burned it, that's when they took the rocks off of each other to
That's
get
right.
the gold out to go back to Rome to finance all the Colosseum and all that.
Plenty of gold there.
Yeah.
In Solomon's time, the silver was worth nothing.
Yeah.
He made it so common.
So this is the third temple there. That may help you understand. Solomon's temple was gone. Then when Herod comes on, his idea is, well, I will rebuild the temple so that the Jewish people have a place to worship, and they'll be grateful to me. And that's what happened. Let's see what the next slide is, Bob. Okay, back again. One more. No, right in the middle. Okay, there's the models that back away from it. And what is thought to be, this is what is interesting to me about it, is that we've already talked about here, this is the Antonia Fortress where the Roman soldiers were. This is where they grabbed Paul, right about in this area right here. Here's the open court where the money changers would be. Here are what was called the stables of Solomon. He would have horses there, but this turned into a mall. It's just kind of a communal marketplace that came to. And the entrance, the main entrance would be back on the back side of this wall here to the city. This is the east gate right here. Very few people would take it because this is a steep slope straight down to the Kidron Valley. But this is how that city would have looked in this model. And you can see there's the sidewalk. You can walk around it. So it's about 120 yards long going around that. And this back here would have been the Palace of Caiaphas, where Jesus would have been tried. He would have gone back and forth through that area right there. We'll pick up there and talk about the Herodium here Wednesday night. Thank you.
How you doing? Just on my feet a lot. Yeah, I was at, yesterday. So I was there from 5 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, I sat here and there, but it was still like walking. You know, like a walk through.
That didn't sound too convincing. You're being good.
I talked to him on Thursday.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna ask.
I'll let you suggest it.